Welcome everyone. Let me remove the logo. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this week in Svelte. Sorry for being a bit late, but we were waiting for our old friend here, Enrico, that will co-host with me today, just like the good old times.
Hey everyone.
So yeah, welcome to this week in Svelte, and we are ready to start. And in today's agenda, we have the usual agenda, like so. We will talk about the changelog. I will stop bothering you with the Svelte Summit because I hope that you know that it's been the last Saturday, and go watch the live stream if you want. Because we also got the exciting news of Svelte 5 release candidate finally. Let's hope that we can cut the actual release soon. We will go over the changelog. We will go over some quick fact, some interesting discussion, and all the things. We don't have a community showcase today, but we have a lot to unpack. So there actually been a bunch of release. Some are really interesting in my opinion. Yeah. One thing that I wanted to show is this, like provide migration helper, because now, I don't know if you noticed it, but if you go to Svelte 5 preview, there is this very neat button here that will basically like show you how you can change between Svelte 4 and Svelte 5. So let's say that you have this very good Svelte 4 component that obviously is working, but is not rune mode. Well, you want to change it. Well, now you can just click migrate, and you can see it's not changing much, but you are now in runes mode. So you just need to copy paste every component inside the REPL. So you take your code base, you copy paste every component inside the REPL, you migrate, and then you copy paste back. No, I'm joking. There will be code mods, obviously.
Yeah, this is excellent. So if anyone's ever concerned, like, oh, how much migration effort will my components have? This is an early look at what that could look like. So definitely try it out just to see. But as Paolo said, a migration script is planned.
Yes, and obviously, this is not perfect. Just an example. Like, let's say that you have this Svelte component here. Let's say that you have like this console log count, for example, right? Now, this obviously increment is not defined. Obviously, I need to change this. Silly me, count plus plus. Now, this is a Svelte 4 component that works pretty fine. And if you try to migrate these, it will actually do something a bit strange, maybe, because it's importing run from Svelte legacy, and then it's running run. This is because the behavior of effect and run is a bit different. So they actually provided this function that it's more closely mimicking the labeled statement from Svelte 4. So it's not perfect. You might have to touch your code, but it's a good start. So if you want to migrate to Svelte 5, you can start with this and then move to actually changing your components. So this was an interesting bit from the changelog. Let me see if there are there are fixes. This is also something I'm very interested in because I don't know if you know, but I have a library which is called SvelteKit View Transition that allow you to quickly create view transition. And now in Svelte 5, the view transition pseudo selector are left untouched. So before, I basically had to always use either .root or .global to allow the pseudo selector to not be washed away. But yeah, now they are left untouched. This is also another. It's a very fun bug. This I was looking at it the other day, but basically you could in theory do this, and the parser would not complain. They fixed it now, but I find it very funny, like that this work and you actually have a valid foo declaration.
Yeah, it looks like a runaway starts with matcher,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
like at constantly. Oh, that's valid.
Yeah. Okay. This is also like there was some problem with the reactive set methods that we used in a previous uh, episode of This Week in Svelte. Uh, and basically, like if you try to do like you use the set inside JavaScript, and you try to do like set for each, for example, you would get nothing back because of how the set is handled under the hood. But now they work fine. Yeah, object. This is another super interesting thing that I wanted to talk about. We now have support for MathML. And what is MathML? I hear you ask. And it's another XML like syntax that is technically like working in the browser. MathML. And I want to copy paste something like it looks like this, which is kind of a mess, but basically allows you. Sorry, I need to zoom in. It looks like this, which is kind of a mess, but it basically allows you to write math expressions in the browser. And so now, if you go to Svelte 5 preview and you drop this in, you get this very beautiful math syntax. So if you are a scientist that is using Svelte, you can now do this. And I would guess, like, I actually didn't try it, and we can try. I would guess that this will actually work with reactive state, right? So if I do,
That's
uh,
pretty funny. You can almost represent anything with XML.
yeah, let's see. Let's state two. Let's use these here. This should work. Poll. Yeah, and now let's add a button. More power. And on click power plus plus. And now if you go more power, yeah, it's changing. Okay. Silly me, sorry, but I think this is really cool. Like when I tried, it's super cool how well it renders, and I think it's really interesting. If you are using math, I think it's yeah, it's really verbose, but it's also really expressive. Like obviously, like you have to specify the input, the I think the mi is the input, mo is the operator and stuff like that. But yeah, it's really like it's verbose, but it's also very cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool that you can represent math like this in XML layout. This kind of reminds me of my other favorite complex diagram maker, Mermaid JS. And Mermaid is actually a standard in GitHub flavored Markdown. It's not really a web standard, but I like how, as you mentioned, expressiveness as a descriptor of the way this is possible. Like you can make a complex sequence diagram using 4 lines of code with clear meaning and clear directionality. So that's kind of cool that this exists.
Yeah, and I also like the other day I saw something. Let me see. Like this is the mermaid syntax. I never actually used it, but the other day I saw something very interesting because I saw uh, a live mermaid to Excalibur. So you could literally write your mermaid code and then convert it to Excalibur, which is another tool to draw. And it's a bit like it's funnier, like it's hand drawn and stuff like that. So it's a bit easier to look at. So yeah, and this is also very cool because if you open this PR, this was basically done by Luke Warlow, which I think is basically trying to like provide support for MathML for every framework. So is going around roaming GitHub and like giving support, and it was all done with a single like PR. It just sent the PR. I don't think there's even an issue, but it opened the PR, and it's very cool that it got merged. Very, very cool. Okay, let's move on some other bit. Improve. There's nothing. Yeah, okay. I think it's actually it. I don't think there's nothing more. Mainly bug fixes. So yeah, for Svelte we have done. I don't think we have anything for Svelte Kit. Again, very focused on Svelte 5. I think we have some new stuff for Svelte dev tools, and for the language tools, I actually got to update my extensions today, because I think there was a slight problem with how bindable types was created, but now it's fixed. So yeah, I think that's it for the changelog.
Yeah, how about we try this month in documentation?
Yes.
If you would do me the honors, please go to the SvelteKit docs, and I'm going to highlight a couple of documentation changes. And the first one is enhanced image. Enhanced image now has clarification that states that this tool, although it's in beta, this tool is designed to be used with local images only. So here in the warning, it says uh, it can only optimize files located on your machine during the build process. So enhanced image is not a good candidate for remotely hosted images, like you have dynamic image URL paths, or you have a CDN delivering several images like a gallery managed by a CMS. Enhanced image is probably not appropriate because the files need to be in your repository or checked out as like a git ignored folder of some kind. The point is it's a build step optimization. So they have to be readily available during build time. So that clarification was added. And the next one, unless you have a question, the next one is about the adapter node documentation. Recently, Kareem added some documentation on system D. Thank you, Kareem, for your contribution. So if anyone has any need for knowing when to shut down adapter node applications, yeah, go to the adapter node docs. So there's graceful shutdown as part of the documentation here. So if ever you want to know when to do a signal termination command, this is how you do it. I think it works best if you're on the latest LTS of Node.js, which I think is version 20 as of today. Version 22 is out, but it's not yet on long-term support. So maybe hold off on upgrading. Version 20 is the LTS today. So yeah, lots of terrific documentation here if you self-host adapter node documentation. Otherwise, if you do container-based hosting, then this may not really be applicable to you.
Yeah. Okay. Pretty cool, and huge shout out to Karim, because he's actually doing a huge work with adapter node. Like it's making the adapter pretty much like much better before than it was before.
Yes, graceful shutdown is nice. And if you're working in Docker, there might be some gotchas with SIGTERM, because when you press Control C on a running Docker container running Node.js, it may not shut down until the 10-second timeout. And for that, you can pass in the --init flag, and the init flag will tell the underlying node instance, like, okay, this is connected to a parent runner of some kind. And then the Control C command will immediately shut down a Docker container running node. But your mileage may vary, because I find that depending on the version of Node, or depending on the wrapping OS, whether it's Alpine or Ubuntu, for example, you might have different behaviors.
Yeah. I mean, Docker, it's a whole beast in itself. Like there are so many things to know about Docker that, like, I'm really grateful that there are people like Karim that help us mere mortals with this with this information.
Yeah, this information is particularly useful for those bare metal self-hosting types if you're not running container runners. I also have a quick fact to share. If you're a Visual Studio Code user, you can set up breakpoint debugging even easier now from this trick I learned from someone on GitHub. Thank you to that user. In Visual Studio Code, if you open the command palette with like Control or Command Shift P, and you do new JavaScript debugger terminal, as opposed to a new terminal, you do what's called a JavaScript debugger terminal. In that terminal, if you run your Vite server using npm run dev or whichever package manager you like, Just running that command will attach the node inspector instance to Visual Studio Code to your source maps, so you can have breakpoint debugging in Visual Studio Code. I'm trying to investigate ways to do this in IntelliJ and other tools too, so maybe look forward to solutions there. But yeah, that's a quick fact. If you want to set up breakpoint debugging very easily, just use the debugging terminal and run your app.
Yeah, very cool. Personally, like I am one of the console log guys. Like I tend to start with a console log, and usually when I cannot like understand something with console log, I usually go with the like if it's something client side, I usually go with like I click on the on the log and then I set up a breakpoint inside Chrome, and then I can step in. So I try to avoid breakpoints like inside my VS Code, but this is very very cool because obviously like sometimes you don't have the ability to do it on the client because you are running code on the server, and that's much more annoying to debug if you don't have a console log. So
Yeah.
and currently like I was not using that because yeah, it's kind of a pain to to attach a debugger and then you have to but with this trick I will definitely try.
Yeah, worth a try. Not invalidating other forms of debugging. They're all useful when they're easy to reach for. And to address a couple of comments, that won't attach to the browser, just the server, right? From my experience, the debugging terminal works in .svelte files as well as server-side files. So whether it's a client-side logic or a server-side logic, they will break when you change things client-side. So if you're in your browser, you click on a button handler, and your VS Code breakpoint is on that button handler, it will in fact break.
Wow,
And
very cool.
Elstaki says, you can also use attach to process, which I think is another built-in Visual Studio Code feature. Yeah, if you go to the debug pane on the left or right side, depending on your flavor, yeah, if you open the debug pane, there's a straightforward way to attach to the run process, or as they say, attach to process. There are like a couple of ways to initiate this. I just thought I'd share the debugger terminal in particular.
And I think now like before you actually had to install the debugger for Chrome and stuff like that, but now I think it comes directly with VS Code, right?
Well, stay tuned. I'm working on some more tips in that regard. So maybe I'll follow up on that and share more because yeah, there are other ways to set up breakpoint debugging within Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome DevTools, possibly Firefox as well. But let me cook for a bit. I need to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like take your time. I want the best tips, so don't worry. Okay, let's move to another small thing, which is another quick fact. It's actually like it's a mix between a quick fact and a Q&A. So I actually prepared an example for this. And let's say that you have this very beautiful form. Uh, it's a get form. So like, you may not know, but there was a debate on Twitter some times ago. But like the default method for a form is actually a get. So and now like you have the input name here, and if I try to write something here like Enrico and I submit this form, you see that like by default a form what we'll do is we'll do a navigation basically. So it will add your name inside the URL. But this kind of has a problem because let's say that you have some other kind of query parameters like the page, for example. So in this case, I am on page 3, and let's say that I want to search here on page 3. Whenever I click go, like the old query parameters is wiped out. You could, in theory, do this. Like if you do action, I actually don't even know if it works. It should work, but like let's say that I do page 3 and like I search here, and if I go, yeah, it doesn't even know. It doesn't even work actually. But what you can do is instead of doing this, which is also pretty annoying, you could use a very cool, like a very old style input, which is input name, and you can specify, for example, the page, and the type is hidden. This input type hidden is just a hidden input. Like it will not show up on the page. It's just a value that's there. And so you can specify the value. In this case, let's say that it's 3, and you can just click here. And in this case, I will be on page 3. And the moment I do this, and if I go, why is it not changing? Let me refresh maybe. If I click here, yeah, page 3 and name SSD. So this is pretty cool, and this is a way you can preserve your query parameters. But what I wanted to show you is this very neat component that I built, because this is actually making use of the page component to allow you to have like a list of old query parameters. So the query parameters that you want to persist, like all the query parameters that are already on the page, and it will create a bunch of input type hidden with all of them. So you can just basically import those on the page. So if you do script here, you import old query param from $lib/old query param .svelte, and you can just drop these. What's the problem? Oh, I'm not using TypeScript. Sorry. I need to change these. And so I need to change all of this. Sorry, guys. I copy pasted this from another project. Can you tell? So if you import these, you can just use it. You can drop it inside your form like this. And by default, this will take every query parameter that is inside your page and add it as an input hidden. So this means that if you are on page 3 and you click inspect here, you might not be able to see it because it's too small and I cannot zoom because Arc has a bug, but there is an input type hidden here with page value 3. And this means that if I search something, try, it will actually do this. Now, the only slight problem here is that in this case, it's also adding name as an input. So what you should do is actually, there is this except array, which is an array of string. And so you can pass except is equal to the array with all the inputs that you're actually overriding. So in this case, name. And this will mean that you have, and even if you have something else like Enrico is equal to true, and you go here, when you search something, it will persist all your query parameters and add the new one. So yeah, I think this is a nice little component. I'm using this a lot because when you want to navigate with a form, you want to persist all your query parameters, you can just drop it in.
It's good to see that I remain true to myself in between navigation. Thank you for that demo.
Yeah,
the
still true.
I really enjoy under-engineered solutions, so input type hidden is very meaningful to me. Also, I assume this works without JavaScript because the component uses an each loop in the markup, and
Yeah.
if you call load again and server render, those hidden inputs should appear.
Yeah. And that's what I was about to say, because Hellodex asked, could this be bundled in the use old params directive instead of a component? If you are using an action, you can actually do it, but that will work only with JavaScript, while these will actually work without JavaScript, which is like these will actually be server-side rendered, and this means that even if the user does not have JavaScript, it will still persist the query parameters. So yeah, I will still do this.
Very cool.
Okay, so this was a quick fact. And now we have a small Q&A, which is like the question that we, again, I remember, I don't know, it's not the right English, but join our Discord, because we pick question from Discord to answer on live stream. So if you have some question, you will most probably get an answer already in the Discord, but you might also get an answer from us. and the question was, where do I connect to my DB? And this is actually like an interesting, I will actually remove my screen for the moment. So where do I connect to my database? There are like the question, as usual, as an answer, which is, it depends. So always, like, you cannot say something wrong if you answer with it depends. And the reason why it depends is because, first thing first, like, it is an actual DB, or is something like Firebase where you want to connect to it from the client, or Supabase and stuff like that. Because it may vary. So first thing first, let's say the proper DB. Like, the answer is probably, you will probably want to connect to it inside your model. You can create a model, db.ts. You import, you create your database client, and then you can export your database client. This also has a it depends note on it, because it's actually depending on what you are using. Because, for example, if you are using I think it was Node Postgres we were talking about before, Enrico. If you're using Node Postgres, probably the best way to do it is actually use a connection pool, because the connection pool with Node Postgres will actually allow you to query, but then you can like the connection will actually be closed as soon as you finish querying. If you're using something else, maybe you might not need to do that. For example, we were talking before with Enrico, and if you're using serverless, it's less important because it will probably shut down. But, like, make sure to still clean up your like, don't rely on the fact that serverless will shut down.
Yeah, and I was going to go over a little bit of pseudo live coding. It's not going to be a working example, but people in particular wanted to know about, like, where do I set up the connection specifically? And so for this example, we're going to put some constraints up. The constraints are, I'm using adapter node. This is a long running server, not a serverless server. And I'm using Postgres. And that's a SQL database with a connection or connection pool, depending on your usage. So what I need to do is set up a connection module, and you can do that in your lib. And the file I like to use is called db.server.js. The .server in Svelte has special meaning. It means you can only import modules exported from here in server-side code. So you can do something like cogsdb equals a method. And in here you can import Postgres, which, and I think the happy path for that is import pg from node Postgres. This is pseudocode, not to be taken too literally, but the point is, you make a connection or you do a new connection pool. Somehow you pass in your credentials, you pass in your environment variables, and then you do export db. You can do it as this, or you can do it as a singleton by calling the function, and then the connection is made the moment you import this anywhere. And then finally, when you import this, and in my case, I'm going to use page.server.js. I'm going to import it here using import db as a named import from $lib db.server, and then the .js is theoretically auto-completed. You can do it explicit if you want, but the point is only page.server.js can import this, because the module is exported from a .server.js module. And then in here, you can do your connection, or you can do your queries. Because if the connection is already established in the singleton, you can go straight to querying select star from passwords. Don't do this. Select star from cats. You can make your query, and then typically in a pooled connection, the query will end the connection after the query finishes, and you can store your results in a variable and then return them to your front end. Obviously, select star is a bit too contrived. You would trim it down and only give your front end the data it needs. But the takeaway here is, you make a library module. You be sure to add the .server.js. Alternatively, you can make a folder called server, and anything inside the server folder can only be imported in server-side code, such as plus page.server.js. So this is a little bit more specific and concrete when it comes to, like, where does the connection happen? And then we got to talk a bit about Firebase.
Yeah, exactly. Because Like the reason again why it depends is because there are other DBs like Supabase or Firebase that are actually using a different strategy. Like you will never import your database on the client, and the reason for it is because you probably need a connection string to connect to your DB, and you don't want to export that. But how Firebase and Supabase solve this is by using something that's called row level security. So inside your database, you can actually specify that you can only access a specific row if you have a specific set of permission. So, for example, if the user ID of that row is the same user of the user that is actually trying to connect. And this will help you with this. So they usually have like a public key. And so we can actually go over our friend that is also in chat post, which is, let me add this to the stage. Um, this is from Captain Codeman, and I will actually zoom in a bit more, I guess. Wrong window. Uh, because obviously, like you want to create some sort of store, for example, some sort of way for example, await for your user, and then be able to do to initialize your actual authentication, basically. And it goes over the fact that, like, if you're just using it for a template, is quite easy to do because, like, you can just await inside Svelte. But and it goes over this example for a readable store, which use this on out state changed from Firebase out. This will be called by Firebase whenever the user is actually logging in. So whenever the user log in, this function will be called. And in this case, what Captain Coleman is doing is calling the set function of the readable with what the outstate changed function will provide, so the user. This has a little of a problem though, because if you want to use that inside a load function, for example, to return data for a specific user, this will not actually work. And the reason why it will not work is because, like, by default, this is a promise that will never resolve. And when the out change, you are swapping this promise with a promise that is already fulfilled with the user as a value. And while this will work in the template because it will react to uh, this readable store, it will not work inside the load function like this, for example, because this will not react to the subscription. So you will actually await the first promise that will never resolve. So is going to create this very interesting user store, which is like it's creating an undefined store, and when out state changed, it's still assigning the user to the store, but then it's creating a new promise that will resolve the moment. So it's using the subscribe function from the readable store to actually get notified when the user will actually change. And when the user will change, so when there is a new user, if the user is not undefined, it will resolve this promise and then unsubscribe from the store. And then it will return the subscribe function that allows you to have the store and a known promise so that you can actually do something, await user.known. And this promise will actually resolve when the user is coming back from Firebase. One question I have actually, Captain Codeman, is like I think like I think you are writing these as, like, you know that uh, this code will actually never run on the server, because one important bit is that you really don't want to use stores on the servers, because if you're using a store on the server, um, Okay, Captain Economy is also saying that Firebase SDK has since added a promise that the user state has settled, so you can actually use that. What I was saying is that stores on the server are really like you need to be very like keen to use store, not keen. I can speak. You need to be very wary of the fact that if you use a store on the server, if you are setting a store on the server, it will actually um, like be shared between all the requests. So what you want to do if you really need to use a store is actually initialize that store in the root layout and then pass it down with a context. And as Captain Codeman was saying, like this is only client side, and that's also why it's using the page load instead of the page server. But be aware that if you are not setting up your application to be a single page application, the client side load function will also run on the server. So pay attention to this.
Yes, and definitely the first time you load a page, an SSR is enabled, a plus page.js file will serve a render. So if you're making an experience like a chat application and you're taking advantage of Supabase or Firebase's real-time updates and database changes, it's likely that you're building a client first application. So maybe for those pages using Firebase, the safe bet is to disable SSR in those cases. Otherwise, as Paolo mentioned, be very careful when you play with stores server side. Unlike the Postgres example, which is like, okay, you have a page with privileged authorized data, you want to load it and server render it and display it statically with like mild manipulations or forms or CRUD based actions. Yeah, your architecture will be different and your code structure will be slightly different. But with these real time databases, it's different as well.
Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, like it depends. Like you are using an ORM, for example, that like does automatic cleanup. You can just put it in a module. You are using a raw driver. You can put it in a module, and then remember to clean up every time. So maybe you want to import it in the hooks to act every time a request comes in, you do all your work, and then you clean up everything. You're using a client side like Supabase or Firebase and stuff like that. Maybe you want to initialize that in the root layout and pass it down as a context. So yeah, there are situations. You want to maybe disable SSR. It depends. I'm sorry, guys. So it's not a definitive answer, but feel free to like look into your situation with this knowledge that we just shared with you, and try to figure out what's your situation basically.
Yeah, it's hard for me to avoid the echo chamber because I live in the CRUD development world and SaaS world. Some people work in real time data. And yeah, so my perspective isn't very representative. And I saw this comment about Supabase supporting the SSR client. That makes a lot of sense because a lot of Happy Path development requires using Postgres as plain Postgres because Supabase is like a wrapper of Postgres with enhanced capabilities like real time data changes. So I can see why they have a server first client as a recommendation approach. Because if you just want a plain database that is protected with keys and secrets, then certainly, yeah, you want to do things completely server side, but depends on your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also like this is basically the same comment like Firebase admin for SSR, then convert to client side for live updates. Yeah, it's interesting. Like this word is very interesting. Like juggle between the server side rendered application and the client side that receive live update is very cool, but also very challenging. Okay, we also finished with our like section on this very small Q&A, and now we can talk about how to prepare your code base, your Svelte 4 code base for Svelte 5, which is again uh, right below the corner, right behind the corner. So yeah, I guess the first thing that you will want to do is take a look at this page, which is all the breaking change. Is not a comprehensive list because obviously something could slip. And also like those breaking changes are actually like there's just an issue that it was open like yesterday to record all the undocumented breaking change, so it will be updated. And if you know of something that is a breaking change between Svelte 4 and Svelte 5, feel free to report it so that we can add it to this appendix. So yeah, there are some breaking changes. For example, before you would do something like this. This is specifically if you're using the client-side component API. There are some differences between how white space is handled. So if you were relying on white space to do something, maybe make sure to try to find a way to avoid it. There are like if you are targeting some very old browser, um, make make sure to like change it because there are more recent browsers that are required. There's also a changing compiler option. For example, uh, like you can see like the CSS option, like it's basically removed now, right? Oh, no, false true
Yeah,
is
and the
removed.
values are different now. So you can only write none as a valid value, and that will tell the compiler completely remove all CSS. Whereas previously, true false were valid values, but are now deprecated and to be removed.
Yeah. You cannot have like, oh man, you can have the legacy option, but now it's repurposed. Like you will use Svelte 4 basically, Svelte 4 way. Hydratable is now being removed. So before you could in theory use hydratable equal false, and Svelte components will just be basically a template engine, and now every component is always hydratable. Source map are also always used now, so you will always have source maps, uh, but tooling obviously can choose to ignore it. um, you now like the tag option was removed, so now you can use Svelte option custom element and you use the tag name. This is if you are actually using like compiling Svelte components to custom elements, and a bunch of bunch of options were removed from the compiler. Also, if you have some component that use a children prop, now we have snippets, and the default snippet for every component is a children prop, so it's now reserved. It's a breaking change. There are also some breaking change only in rune mode. So uh, basically, this is a list of breaking change that will affect your component, even if you just do npm I svelte at 5. So uh, as you may know, like Svelte 5 is basically retrocompatible, so you could in theory just update your Svelte application to Svelte 5 and everything should work just fine, except for these breaking changes. And if you then move to rune mode, there are also some other breaking change. For example, you cannot bind to component exports. So before, you could do something like export const foo and get the value of foo on the parent by doing bind foo. This is now like you cannot do it anymore in rune mode. Binding needs to be explicit defined. So as you may know, now there we have this bindable rune, and if you want to bind to that prop, you actually need to have $bindable on the things. Accessor option is ignored. So before, you could have set accessor to true, and this means that your Svelte component will have a series of property for every prop that you can actually manipulate. This is not the case anymore. Let me see. Stricter CSS global selector validation. So before you could do something like this, which is not a valid selector. The hash position is no longer deterministic. So before, Svelte 5, as you may know, use a CSS hash class to scope your styles to your components. Before, it was always the last element of the class. So if you went and see the class inside the HTML, the hashed component was always the last one. And yep, now it's not the last anymore. This is also an interesting one. Before, it was just another class. Now they actually use where, and this means that the CSS that Svelte generates does not add a specificity to your elements, while before it was like this.
I tried that one recently. I noticed when you do nested CSS, which is now a browser native feature, the Svelte will use the :where pseudo selector, and
Mm.
:where will have a specificity of 0, which means anytime your child or your child element has different CSS applied to it, perhaps in a global style sheet, then those will have priority because : where will yield priority to anything else.
Yeah, exactly. There's also a change in before update and after update. I don't know if you ever used it because I never had the need to do it, but like those are basically callbacks that were invoked before a prop change and after a prop change, after a variable change, basically. And now you can just use $effect pre and $effect. So they are basically disallowed in rune mode. There's also a change in content editable behavior. Content editable is very funny because it basically allows you to make everything an input, but it's also very funky. It's basically, I don't know, like every browser does things in a different way. So yeah. Um, Before you could do on click and pass a string, just like in raw HTML, but now this will actually register a click listener on the button, and so I mean it's disallowed, but you shouldn't do this. Use proper event listener.
Yeah, this is a very rare case of Svelte commandeering a native HTML feature and sort of overtaking the behavior, which in this rare case, I think it's acceptable because passing a string to an onclick is actually discouraged by the W3C. It's a very legacy thing to do, much like marquee. I'm joking. Please don't give me marquee shenanigans. But the point is it's different.
Yeah, and marquee is the best, by the way. But yep, like it's discouraged. And this is also interesting, like if you are building something like a preprocessor for Svelte, because walk, which is a function that allows you to walk the AST from Svelte, is no longer exported. Before, Svelte was basically just taking walk from ES3 Walker and export it from Svelte compiler. And they decided to not do this anymore. You can just install ES3 Walker and walk your tree like this. But obviously, like this is just something. For example, another list that you might follow is, okay, if you are a library author, how do you prepare for Svelte 5? And if you're a library author, the first thing that you should do is just append or caret 5.0.0 to allow every user of your library to actually use your library in Svelte 5 inside your peer dependencies. And there are also some other small thing. For example, and I want to show you an example. This is actually not covered by the migration script. So this is actually something that you might need to do by hand. So let's say that you have this item component, right? And you have a prop, which is, we can actually do it in 5. So we have a prop, which is a bindable prop. So $sign props. Oh, sorry. Props. Let's say that I have this item prop, which is a bindable props. So now I have these bindable props here. Let's say that I want to bind something. So I have this items here. Items, it's an array of object foo1. Let's do foo2. And now I want to iterate over them. And one thing that maybe some people did before was I iterate over items as item, and then I want to do like this each, and I want to go item. I need to import it, and then you go bind item like this. If I import item from item.svelte, you already see the error, like cannot reassign or bind to each block argument in rune mode. Use the array index variables instead. So it's actually giving you a very good error, in my opinion, because what you should do is probably do something like this. I, and then you bind item to items at I. So this means that you're not using item anymore, so ESLint might yell at you. You can just do this. Usually, it depends on how your ESLint is set up. There's also another problem. I actually answered a discussion before on GitHub, like because people, a person like was doing like this. So to basically, if items is undefined, I will just not iterate over this, and TypeScript will actually yell at you in this case because like this could be undefined. So in this case, just use an if. You can just do if items.
Oh, there's also an else directive inside the each loop you can use.
I think I also think of that, but I think the else directive only work if the item's length is 0. I might be wrong though.
Oh, let me guess. Is this TypeScript narrowing? Is that what this is?
Yeah, exactly. This is just for TypeScript. Like
thank you, TypeScript.
Yeah. Thanks, Obama. And what I was saying is that like these, let's say that you have these as a Svelte component. This will not yell at you in Svelte 4. So we are not in rune mode. So let's say that I do these. I need to have item here. This works in Svelte 4, and this is not covered by the migration. So if I run migrate, I will actually get an error. But again, like this is actually like a reasonable error. You can just migrate your code base unless you're doing this in 100 place. That could be annoying, but maybe so it's even like we can talk with Simon and ask him if this is actually something that we can automate for you.
Yeah.
So
I have some extra tips as well. So if you're an application developer and you're preparing for Svelte 5, especially if you're like in an enterprise context, you have a large team and you have other dependencies, my warning will be to take a look into what your dependencies are, such as Storybook, such as Sentry. If you rely on other community libraries, you might need to wait for them to add official stable support for Svelte 5 before you yourself upgrade your applications. This also includes things like testing library and things like that. So watch out for the ecosystem of dependencies you have in your projects and make sure that they're ready so that you can be ready too. And I think that's a win-win, but it also causes a drift because if you're starting Svelte today, like I am at my workplace, you're going to have to use Svelte 4 for a little bit, perhaps a few months. But that's the small price to pay for making sure that everyone's aligned. And I think on Saturday, Rich Harris had an announcement or some advice for library maintainers, and that was to watch your peer dependencies, which looks something like this. So if you're going to be supporting Svelte 5 now, while it's still in release candidate, this is likely the kind of string you will compose in your package. So the peer dependency example I have in front of me is Svelte Carre 4 or Carre 5 dash next or Carre 5. The reason why you need both Carre 5 and Carre 5.next is because of the way NPM works. Other package managers like Yarn or PNPM have different behavior, but NPM will not allow Carre 5 to work with the release candidate of Svelte 5. So that's why you must have the dash next. And in your documentation, you can also, in your documentation for your library, you can state that, hey, we're temporarily supporting the release candidate, but that will be phased out with the release of Svelte 5. So adding these to your peer dependencies is a backwards compatible change. It's not going to cause a major version bump for your library. And if you later remove Array5-next to your library, you can get away with a patch instead of a major. Typically, when you remove peer dependency ranges, that is a breaking change. But because this is a release candidate, and because you warned your users, you can actually get away with a patch because you will be supporting Svelte 5 proper as well. If you remove Svelte 4 support, that is, of course, a breaking change.
Yep, and I shared the sorry. I actually I didn't notice that you were explaining something with the banner. So I actually shared before that I shared the YouTube video from Rich Harris that did on Svelte Summit. So check it out, because if you are a library authors, you can actually do something for Svelte 5. So you can help Svelte 5 to grow by updating your library to use Svelte 5.
Yeah, we're all in this together. So if Svelte 5 is to be successful, we need to support Svelte 4 for some interim period, but with the full intent of not supporting Svelte 4 long term. So try not to put too much effort or investment in maintaining Svelte 4 projects unless you have the resources, of course, or the service level agreements in place. There are exceptions, but and for the most part, you want to keep your effort really lightweight. So try to support Svelte 5 as exclusively as you can. And if you have abandoned libraries like those that are still supporting v3, or if you yourself maintain such a library, then you can decide whether or not to pursue those further. And there's going to be some stragglers, for better or worse, because people's life change and things happen. But for those that are still actively maintained and you have projects you actively maintain, yeah, the best course of action I recommend is to strongly, strongly encourage Svelte 5 support as early as possible. And that way, long term, Svelte 4, when Svelte 4 syntax gets eventually deprecated and eventually removed, uh, we can all say we did the best we could.
Yeah, and let's start prepare with Svelte for Svelte 6. So let's everybody start to prepare for Svelte 6. Okay, guys, I think that's it for today. As usual, I hope you learned something. It was a pleasure to finally have Enrico back for a while. Uh, and I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this ride. And I'll see you guys next week.
Bye bye.